Good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for coming today for our third day of GreenTalks. It was a fabulous 2 days. And now we're going to be starting once again. I will be giving a more robust land acknowledgement a little later on today, but for now, I do still want to take the time. Please, everybody, I know that we're from all across the different areas of the country. Please take a moment to reflect on the traditional territories that you're currently on. For me, I am on Treaty 13 territory, the traditional territories of the Wendat peoples, the Haudenosaunee, the Anishinaabe, and the Mississaugas of the Credit. So right now we have a very exciting talk planned for you, but I'm going to turn the floor over to Phoebe Cullingham. Thank you very much for coming.
Hey, Allison, thanks so much for helping organize this. So my name's Phoebe. I am in Ottawa Centre and former CEO of Ottawa Centre. And I was really lucky to get to work with Wyatt already on presenting this talk. And I found it really interesting. Wyatt is a little bit of an AI aficionado. He's also a former candidate, an engineer, I believe, and an author on the topic of AI. So I've already seen an early version of this presentation, and I think you guys are all really in for kind of an interesting perspective that we don't often see, and maybe we need to start grappling with. So Wyatt, I'll hand it off to you.
Thanks, Phoebe. Welcome, everyone. My name is, as I mentioned, Wyatt Tesseri. I was for those who have been in the Green Party for a while, may recognize me. I was a longtime Green from 2010 to 2015, campaigned as a candidate a number of times, and I'm currently nonpartisan, so I'm giving this presentation as an independent, but I'm very familiar with the Green space. I'm going to share my screen here, make sure that you can see it. Okay, assuming give a heads up in the panelist chat that I screen. Okay, I'm going to, there we go. So we'll get started here. So today I'm going to be talking about AI and why, even though it's not a traditional green topic, AI should be a priority for everybody, including the Greens. And for some context about AI, when you think of stories or of political narratives, why we're here, who we are, what we're doing, and what needs doing. Since the Enlightenment and the Industrial Revolution, there's been this story of progress of your life being better than your parents' life, your children's life being better than yours. Increasing wealth, increasing rights, that kind of stuff. And while there have been a number of setbacks over the years, there's also the overall trend is pretty clear. There has been a reduction in violence. There has been an increase in wealth, so that story that typically the progressive movement carries with it is still still part of our reality. But of course, the Greens green narrative comes along and says, well, okay, great, you have these progress in certain areas, but meanwhile, we are devastating our ecosystems. We are disrupting the climate that we rely on for everything. And so the green narrative comes in and completes that narrative with a new layer of who we are, what we should do right now, and what needs doing. And so the typical conclusion of the green narrative is, okay, so now we need to focus on climate change and getting our environmental dealing with all the environmental challenges. This presentation is going to talk about basically a new chapter on the scale of the Industrial Revolution, on the scale of climate change, and it has to do with smarter than human intelligence, whether that be standalone AI systems or enhanced human beings. This presentation will be focused on AI, but the case I'll be making is that what we face now with AI is equally as big, if not bigger, than the issues we face on the environment. So I'll give a brief overview of what I'm trying to do today and who I am. The bulk of this presentation will be focused on artificial general intelligence, which is the long-term when AI reaches human levels. and I'll go through all the context of what it is and when it's likely to be developed. After that, there will be a live Q&A. Now the Q&A will be happening in, I'll be taking questions off of the Rocket Chat thread. So I believe there's a link in the Zoom panel you can click on, and if not, you can just search why AI in Rocket Chat and you'll find the thread. Cette présentation sera en anglais, mais si vous avez des questions en français, vous pouvez me les poser durant la session de questions-réponses. Il me fera plaisir de répondre en français. After the Q&A, I will share some final thoughts and recommend next steps. So who I am. I am originally from BC. I grew up in Europe. I studied engineering in Montreal. My passion has always been politics and working out what matters most. In 2010, when I decided to get involved and engaged civically, I looked around and it was clear to me that the biggest issue was climate change. It was severely neglected, and the only party taking it seriously was the Green Party. So that's how I ended up joining the Greens. I wanted to make a difference to shift the debate around climate change. And I campaigned my heart out, gave my heart and soul to the Green Party for 5 years, up until 2015. And in 2015 is when I was introduced to the topic of AI and specifically AGI, which I'll get to later. It forced me to really take a step back and think through, okay, so what else was I missing? So I did a lot of research as to 21st century trends, everything from the rise of China to economics to other technologies, trying to get a sense of, okay, so what should I be campaigning for and why? And the conclusion I came to is the conclusion I'll be sharing today, which is advanced intelligence is the issue of the century in many ways. So my goals with this presentation is really to introduce the topic for many who have never heard of it, to make the case that it really is the next chapter that we face, and that's in terms of what we need to do is to figure out how we want to build it, how we want to use it, and make sure we have the institutions, the governments, and the norms in place to that, so that we have this very capable technology. It is used to build the kind of future that we want to build. So what is artificial general intelligence? So first of all, when you think of intelligence, it comes down to the ability to achieve complex tasks. And typically that means, an intelligent agent or intelligent life form can understand the world around it, can navigate it, and can change it in meaningful ways. And so when you look at artificial intelligence, it's that in computer form. It is, one thing to keep in mind, AI simply is a piece of software. It's lines of code, running on hardware. It's a, in the same way that you have a piece of software on your computer at home, you give it a task, it calculates the solution. And AI is defined by its utility function, its goal. So what are you asking it to optimize for? It's defined by the data it's trained on. How do you teach it, what is good and what to do, and also obviously on the hardware that it runs on. AI is a particularly disruptive technology because it is general purpose. In the same way that electricity is in everything we do, the technology of electricity has, is in computers, it's in agriculture, it's in everything. Anytime you touch anything today, it requires electricity. In the same way, AI can be used for essentially any task. So it's already in a number of applications, and I'll go into those later, but as AI progresses and is capable of more and more things, it will be, a technology that powers most, if not all, of the economy moving forward. So current AI, you're probably familiar with these ones. Google search is probably the most used AI system in terms of it figures out, based off what the words you enter into the Google search bar, it comes up with the best matches. AI is being used in legal decisions to parse through, thousands of pages of previous legal examples. It is used in autonomous vehicles, in translation. It's used a lot in the stock market to try to make more money. It's very pervasive. Now, it's considered, current AI is still a fairly dumb AI. It's very narrow in the sense that your autonomous vehicle AI is not going to be able to translate anything for you, and your Google search AI is not going to fly a military drone. However, there are already some early signs of generality. Google DeepMind now has algorithms that can play a number of very different computer games with very little training, and the AIs are learning behaviors such as experimentation, such as curiosity, such as imitation, which are behaviors that we have as humans and are very useful for a wide variety of tasks. GPT-3 hit the headlines last year. It is OpenAI was one of the labs working on general AI specifically, and GPT-3 is a text-based AI system. And I'm going to click on this and actually I already got it open. Okay, okay. Sorry, I need to get my. So basically, what it is it's a text prediction algorithm, and you can, to put it simply, you can ask it a question, and it'll answer it in questions. So I have a few of these prepared here. So the interesting thing about GPT-3 is how open it is. So typically, if you ask a question, an open-ended question to a computer program or to an AI system, it'll have a heck of a time understanding what it is you're talking about and coming up with an answer. Here, I'm asking it a question in French, open-ended question about how Justin Trudeau's election damaged Canada-China relationships. And when I run it, it not only understands what the topic is, it provides a coherent, intelligible answer to it, pulling on, and real data. And I mean, this is the kind of thing, don't show this to your kids because, they could use this to actually answer, to do their homework for them. This level of understanding of what the topic is, of formulating a coherent response is pretty impressive given where AI has come from. To give another example, and you can, with this tool, you can adjust the length of the another question here. There again, I mean, you can agree or disagree with this content, but it is a intelligible, on-topic answer to a very open-ended question, and you can be. I mean, there isn't that much content out there for it to learn from in terms of Green Party of Canada. So it's coming up with relatively little information. It's coming up with an intelligible answer, and this is where, I mean, there's a lot of applications like customer care or where anything text-based can be answered. So anyways, this is however, so this, as impressive as this is, it has some limitations, and it may or may not behave on this one because sometimes it gets it right. But if I go to, okay, we got it right this time. Okay. So I'm going to run this until it gets it wrong, pretty much. But okay, now it's misbehaving. There you go. So I as intelligent as the system is, and it's literally been fed all of the data on the internet, it doesn't yet have reasoning. So what it's doing is very, very, very high-end pattern matching. So this is where, this is a limitation of current AI. It can do some very impressive things, but it's still, in terms of the human reasoning piece, that part is missing. So I'll go back to the presentation here. Okay. So in terms of, so the difference between narrow AI and general AI is the ability of the AI to do a great variety of tasks, open-ended tasks that require a great variety of skill sets. So whereas narrow AI, we are still smarter than autonomous vehicles at literature or at, other, it may be better drivers than us, but it's not going to be better, friend than us. But AGI is that point, general AI is that point where it can do everything that we can do. Every form of intelligence that we have, whether it be empathy, whether it be, wisdom, whether it be all that kind of, all those forms of intelligence, AGI is the point where AI matches human beings on all those levels. And the most interesting thing about AGI is that you can use an AGI system to build an even smarter AGI system. So starting from a human level intelligence, you can get to smarter than human, you can get to 10 times human intelligence, and you can keep improving that level of AI until it's who knows, a million times human intelligence. And that's where you get the what they call a super intelligence, which is basically it's a whole new scale of capability. And whereas when we look at insects and we say, oh, that's a dumb insect, an AGI, a fully super intelligent system, would look at the human IQ of 100 and consider that and it would be tiny compared to what the AGI could do. This book, by the way, is a little bit outdated, but it has some very interesting outlines of how you get to superintelligence from current AI. Now, as science fiction-y as AGI can sound, there are a number of reasons why it's well on its way and very likely to be developed. The strongest argument is simply that everyone on this call has a general form of intelligence. So what we're trying to, what the AI technologists are trying to do is to recreate what evolution already created through trial and error. So we know it's possible. We also know it is very, very useful. You could use it to make a ton of money. You could use it to invent all future technologies. You could use it to win a war. There are, and I'll go get into this later on in the presentation, but there are a lot of very, very strong incentives to be the first to build this technology and to use it for good and for bad uses. Another reason why it's likely is that there's already a race to build it. Google DeepMind, I believe their mission is to solve intelligence and to use intelligence to solve everything else. OpenAI, which created GPT-3, has in their mission to build general AI. There are others like Anthropic, and of course, militaries. You can be certain that the American military and the Chinese militaries are racing to build this as well, because the more, even if you don't reach full AGI, the more advanced AGI you have is going to be a decisive advantage on the battlefield. And of course, there's going to be companies and private labs that are working on this as well. So the race to build AGI is already on. Now, nothing in life is 100% guaranteed. There are ways in which AGI wouldn't happen. There is an argument to be made that AGI is a very, very, very complex technology, and that we as human beings may not be able to understand it well enough to build it. I'm not particularly swayed by this argument, but it's possible. Although keep in mind, we know how to genetically modify ourselves. We could slowly improve our own intelligence through traditional biological means until we reach the point where we have smart enough human beings to create AGI. Another perhaps more likely mode of failure is that in a world of climate change and pandemics and nuclear risk, we may collapse before we get to AGI. And another possibility, and this well, is a discussion to be had, is that the world may consider it too risky to build. There may be some kind of global pact to ensure that it never does get built. I mean, that would be extremely difficult to do, but it is a mode of failure. The thing with AGI is that we don't have, there's no clear warning system of heads up, we're 5 years away from AGI, because we simply don't know what breakthroughs we need to reach AGI. However, there will be, there are already many disruptions from AI in terms of everything from deep fakes to military drones to impacts on our legal system. There are going to be many big AI disruptions along the way, and so that will give us a little bit of a heads up, but we don't know. It'll be very difficult to know, when it'll be developed. So that's as to what it is and why it's likely. This next section is probably the most difficult to talk about, simply because it is, it's future shock in action, in the sense that, the things that a full AGI system could do are very transformational. They're very disorienting, and I've broken it down into 3 categories: the technical risks and opportunities, the societal ones, and the geopolitical ones. And what I hope to give you here is not an exhaustive list of all the things that could be done with AI, both good and bad, but just to give you a sense of how, when I talk about it being bigger than climate change as an issue, this is why. So first of all, the technical risks. So looking at the positives, so to the right side of the slide, you could use a significantly smarter than human AI system to help us solve a lot of the causes and and consequences of climate change. You could use it to help us, deal with pandemics far more efficiently than we dealt with COVID. You could use it to things like, detecting and preventing the landing of large asteroids. It would also be our final invention in the sense that a smarter than human AI system could develop all future technology. And so you'd have this rapid development of a whole bunch of things that we currently don't have. Obviously advanced understanding of the universe as well. Now on the risk side, and this is probably the biggest risk there is, the reason AI is a risk is because it is so capable. If the goal is poorly defined or if the values are poorly aligned, you end up with some very, very bad scenarios. So for example, the stereotype example is you task an AGI system to end all cancer. And it may calculate, quite reasonably that the most effective, efficient way of doing that is simply to end all life. Now that's an extreme example. How likely is that particular thing going to happen? We don't know. But whereas, climate could cause devastation, it's unlikely to cause extinction. AGI worst case scenario could cause extinction. Now, for some context, we've had nuclear, the possibility of nuclear war for 70 years. It hasn't happened. It's not because one of the millions of possibilities of AI is extinction that's not likely to happen. But it is, in terms of the scale of danger of AI, of risk, AI, beats out all other catastrophes we face this century. In terms of value alignment, even if it does exactly what we ask it to do, for example, say you task an AI system with, getting you to the airport as fast as possible, it may calculate the best way to do that is to, get you there, with 5 speeding tickets, running over pedestrians, and vomiting all over the back seat. I mean, there's a sense of like making sure that it performs in the way that we would want it to perform is a remarkably difficult thing to do. And it's not impossible, and it's not to say that AI will by default be negative. It's just that there are a lot of risks that come with AI. The more likely risk in my mind of AI is that as these systems become more highly complex, start dealing with more complex tasks, it'll be very difficult for us to understand what it is it's doing, and to be able to correct it if in that context. So in the same way that, for example, a child needs a parent to understand things that it can't understand and make decisions on its behalf, we may reach a situation with AGI where we become so dependent on it to handle, complexities that our human brains are limited in what we can do, and we become very, very dependent on it. Now, it could create a very beautiful world for us, but there is a risk of dependency. So those are the technical risks. Societal risks and opportunities. Same thing, some very, very powerful goods, some very powerful bads. Needless to say, the AGI, given how capable an AGI system could be, whether it be the private lab or whether it be the military or whether it be whichever organization builds AGI first, they could use it to dominate, for example, wealth creation, and there could be a severe concentration of wealth. I mean, even more so than we're seeing with the tech industry right now, with current, AI. At the same time, because AI systems would be able to develop future technology, it would be able to provide goods and services in a far more energy efficient, cost efficient way than we do now. So you could be looking at, extremely cheap goods, abundance in most, if not all, parts of the world, and so you have these two dynamics going on. In terms of automation, I mean, there's been a lot of threat of technological unemployment that threat has been going on for 100 years, if not more. The reason why technology has not replaced human beings yet is because there's always been things that human beings could do that technology couldn't. AGI is that point where AI can do whatever a human being can do. So it means that if you're a company and you could replace a human being, whether it be a CEO, whether it be an employee, with an AI system. It's going to be far more cost efficient, far more safer, better, faster if you use an AI system versus a human being. So you could face unless we put in laws to protect human labor, you could be facing a world of mass unemployment. At the same time, living in a world of abundance, you probably won't need to work. So a very, very it's a very disorienting new world we'd be facing. There are other things like, life managed by algorithms. It'll be there again. If you have a significantly smarter than human AI system, it'll figure out stuff that we can understand. It'll be making decisions on our behalf. And there could be a lot of, human nature that is constrained for our own good. We may see, cigarettes disappear or whatever it is. But by doing so, it'll be providing us with, significantly improved healthcare. Essentially, the elimination of bureaucracy if we were to allow it to replace government employees. And human crime, you're no matter how smart your human thief or your human, they're simply not going to outsmart an AI system. So, you could be living in a world with almost no crime. AI crime is a separate. I mean, you have to need, anyways, but human crime would be definitely within easily caught. So, this could create a vastly better world where we have, first of all, you live in a world of abundance. You live in a world where you have a whole bunch of free time to work on, passion projects, to engage civically, to build, the world that AI could enable could be a very, very beautiful world. It could also be a very disorienting one. But I hope to give you this slide is just a flavor of how big a deal AI is. And then lastly, and certainly not least, the geopolitical risks and opportunities. In theory, you could use an AGI system to ensure that no future AGI system is built. So you could have, which could be both good and bad. It means that if the first AGI systems are properly built, properly designed, there's an agreed on use to it and global collaboration, you could use AGI to significantly reduce the risk of war, to significantly improve the lot of most people. But it could also be misused if the first if God forbid Vladimir Putin's Russia is the one first to build AGI, you could see a very, very negative world. So, I mean, there's a lot of content on this slide. All this to say, the political dynamics, the power dynamics that are currently based on current technology do get thrown in the air in a lot of ways, and there could be a very, especially the power dynamic between the technologists who build the technology and the governments who have a responsibility to all citizens to make sure the technology is properly, could get very complicated and very interesting. If you're a government, and a lab builds a type of AI that could, going back to the risk piece, cause severe damage to the rest of society, do you have a national obligation to, take ownership of that lab? Meanwhile, of course, you'd be heavily dependent on the technologists themselves to be able to manage technology. So these three slides are very, there's a lot of content on them. They're just a flavor of the kinds of change that we could be facing in the coming decades. Which brings to the question of, okay, so timeline. So we have this technology which is significantly more advanced than anything we've seen before. We've had many promises of technology in the past that will be developed, just around the corner and never happens. How long will it actually take to get from current GPT-3 to a full AGI system? And when you look at what is required, there is a strong case to be made that we already have enough computing power. There's a strong case to be made that we already have enough data, to train an AI system. The question really comes down to algorithms. How much more complex is general intelligence compared to current AI? How many breakthroughs do we need to get from current AI to a general form? And it's the honest answer is that it's anybody's guess. We don't know. There are historical examples, like, for example, fission power. I think the Lord Rutherford, I think it was in the 1930s, infamously proclaimed that no one will ever harness the energy of the atom for peaceful or warfare uses. And I think it was the next day or the next week that the first paper was submitted on exactly how to do that. But then meanwhile, fusion power has been promised to us since the 1970s. And we're still, I mean, there's some breakthroughs last in September, but we're still at least 10 years away from fusion power. So, which path will AGI take? I mean, are we talking about 10 years, or are we talking about 50 years? The experts in the AI community that have been pulled on this tend to agree that there's about a 50% chance by mid-century, but we generally don't know. It could be easier than we think. We could have AGI in 10, 15 years. It could also be much harder than we think, and we could have it in 50 years. But when you take the example of climate change, 50 years ago, the science around climate was already pretty clear. We already knew it was going to be an issue. But 50 years later, we have just barely started to agree on making sacrifices for each other, having systems in place to monitor emissions, to transition. And as you know well, we are very, very far from actually properly dealing with climate change. On the AI front, even if we have guaranteed in writing, it'll be 50 years at least before this technology is built. Even if we have that guarantee, we're still in a race against time. Because AGI is a global issue, it will impact everybody. You would, in an ideal situation, need to get everybody on board with how it's used, who builds it, and make sure that we have systems in place so that we can create the world we want to create with it. So even though the timeline is unknown, we're essentially already in a race against time. So what needs doing? At this stage, we're very, very early stage. It's still, the only people who are very familiar with it are the ones, there's centers in around Oxford in England, San Francisco, and in the Bay Area is obviously very aware of this issue. And there are a few like MIT and a few other sort of leading technology, it's a similar way where the climate scientists were aware of the issue back in the 70s, but it was still not a common topic until much later. We're at that very early stage on AGI. And I think one thing we can learn from climate is, the IPCC, the International Panel on Climate Change, is very good at being that internationally recognized, accepted, credible body on the latest climate science. We basically need that on AI because technology is growing, moving very fast, because there are a whole number of stakeholders building it, and because everybody will be impacted by it in some way. I think the best thing we can do right now is to call for an international UN-backed body to look into AI and monitor its progress. Obviously, funding safety and AI policy research is a good idea, and obviously, education and raising awareness, which is what I'm doing today. This is at the very beginning of a very long journey, but there are a lot of questions we need to answer, such as, who should build AGI? Who should use it? How, if it is built, how do we make sure that the benefits are shared, that you don't end up with this, massive concentration of wealth within a very small group of people? How do what values do you give an AGI system? Like, how do you ensure that, what are human values? What do we consider to be a good outcome or a bad outcome? And how do we, what kind of future do we want to build if we no longer need, for example, paid work? How do we, what do we fill our days with? There's a lot of these very open-ended, fundamental discussions to be had around the world that an AGI system could build. It's a long, complex conversation that needs to involve pretty much everybody around the world, because everybody will be impacted. This slide is thrown in with some further reading. If you have the time, the best introduction to this topic is the 2021 BBC Reith Lectures. So those who aren't familiar with them, the BBC Reith Lectures are like the CBC Massey Lectures. They're the most, they're a very prestigious lecture series every year given to an important topic. And there are 4 podcasts on this, and it really does a good job of explaining, general intelligence and why AGI is a big deal. There are also some very good books out there. Added a few photos. I recommend these as well. And I can probably post this into the Rocket chat as well. Yeah, there's plenty to read out there about AGI and to learn more about it. So the reason I'm giving this presentation to the Green Party and to a political party in general is because it challenges the Green narrative about where we're at and where we're headed and what we should do. For some context, to be fair to the Greens, every party is about to get disrupted by AI. You can be sure that the conservative vision for the future and the liberal vision for the future and the NDP and any others are going to be, put on, disrupted by this as well. This slide I'm particularly focused on why it's both a challenge and an opportunity for the Greens. And so the first one is simply, the Greens up until now have very rightly been pointing out that, like, if you get climate change wrong, nothing else matters. Your economy, your society depend on a stable environment. What AGI does and challenges that narrative is it says, yes, climate change is still a big deal, but it's not as big a deal as AI. And so the one challenge for the Green Party is to find a way to incorporate AI into the green narrative in a compelling way. Another major challenge is the notion of sustainability. I mean, sustainability is often referred to as this the 7 generations. If we can do something for 7 generations, it's sustainable. In a generation or two, we're looking at human intelligence being obsolete. What does sustainability mean if the world is radically different in 10 or 20 years? That's not to say that sustainability doesn't matter or that we shouldn't continue to take it seriously, but simply that the green vision will have to be updated to address this massive amount of change that we're about to face. How the AI is also a big opportunity for the Greens. Historically, the Greens have been the most forward-looking party. They were 20 years ahead on gay marriage. They're 20 years ahead on climate. Obviously, the Greens have a healthy respect for science, and I think that this is where the Greens could continue to be the forward-looking party and take the lead on this issue. It's also, AI is as global and as complex an issue as climate, and the fact that the Greens have, already have this mentality of we're all humans on this planet, we all need to work together. I mean, that is exactly the kind of attitude you need to be able to deal with something like AGI. And so this is one option, but you could see, one of the ways you could address AI and still be green in terms of values is to shift from protecting current ecosystems to helping all life and ecosystems transition to this new phase. We are headed into a very different world. Doing so with ecological wisdom, with respect for diversity, with all of the green values is going to be essential. And I think there's a lot of, if the Greens have an opportunity here to really be that forward-looking party and to embrace, address both the risks technology presents, but also have the most compelling vision to how to harness the technology for good. So yeah, that's a lot of information. I will now take questions. Okay, let me just see if I can get. So, okay, I'm just looking at.
Hey, Wyatt.
Yes, yeah.
Are we able to share the link to the presentation with people in attendance? I think there's quite a bit of information that people would love to have.
Oh, you mean to share the slides or
yeah.
Yes, I'll have to. I can do that after at the end of the session. I'll definitely so that yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. So a lot of comments here.
Wyatt, I had a quick question.
Yes. Yeah.
Where were you a candidate, and what was the reception like with trying to bring this to general folk during an election?
So I was a candidate. Well, initially I was a paper candidate and came back in 2011, but then I was in BC for 2013 provincially and 2015 federally. I was in Burnaby South. I have not since looking into AI. I have not campaigned on AI. This is. I was campaigning on climate change back when I was still running as a candidate. So yeah, this is. And I'm not even sure. I don't even think we're at the stage of being able to campaign on AGI simply because it is. We're at the stage of having to explain what it is. Nonetheless, I think it's very much in every party's interest to think through and figure out, okay, what is the Green Party policy on this? Because there's going to be a growing number of people who are start caring about this. There already is. From in the last 5 years, it's gone from a tiny number to a much significant, much larger number. So. Yeah, the earlier you can start working on this, the better. Even if if you try to campaign on this, tomorrow, or in the next election, it'll probably be a difficult sell. Hope that answers the question. Any other live questions, or I'll take.
Well, I'll give you a follow-up question on that, Wyatt. Where do you think the current political discourse is on this in Canada right now?
The honest answer is that it's nowhere to be found. This is, I mean, because this is such a new issue in terms of our understanding of it. What I'm trying to do personally is just get that conversation started. So which is why I wanted to talk about this with the Green Party, and I'm also trying to giving it to other parties as well. In an ideal world, everybody understands what the implications of AGI, has a position on it, and we can have a constructive conversation about what kind of alternating visions of what to do with AI. So this is, I mean, like as I mentioned, the best analogy is this is where climate change was back in the 1960s and 70s, where the logic is there. We can see that it's going to be a big deal, but it's just very, very early in the game.
All right, there's a hand raised from Bruno. I'm going to allow him to talk and ask his question.
Sure. Okay. Yeah.
Thank you. Yes, not so much a question. I just wanted to say thank you to Wyatt for bringing this to everyone's attention. I agree 100%. I've actually worked with machine learning technologies, and I've been someone that's been learning even how to program AI type technologies. And there is a growing concern in at least the academics, the scientists that work with this, that we're going to run into all sorts of issues. In the future, AI could be one of those things that even the education that you have could, severely change the kind of class that you're in, just based on what you can do with it. Because you could literally create, bot armies that do work for you at a service level. Wyatt, I wanted to ask you a question. Actually, have you read the book Life 3.0?
I have, yes. It's one of the sources I listed on my slides.
Yeah.
It's very important. One of the very
Yeah, so I'd be happy to work with you on any of the kind of provisioning that Max Tegmark had brought up in that book, because he's a mathematician, so he looks at things from a mathematics perspective, like what are the inevitabilities from probability perspectives, and he's right. I mean, he predicts that we might already have what he calls a Prometheus process happening now, where there could already be an AI and we're not even aware of it, because they could be that advanced. So. And with Amazon AWS services and Google Cloud services, which are completely virtualized services now, there could literally be entities running on those services that no human is even aware of. So I think governments do need to wisen up about this. They need to realize what the impacts could be from that, and we need to have proper oversight and standardization of the industry. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. Yeah.
All right. Did you have anything to respond, Wyatt, or can we move to other questions?
I know that does. I think you said a lot of what I agreed with. Yeah.
All right. I'm going to move to David Woodbury. I'm going to just turn him to talk there. There you go.
Sure. David, I can't hear you. Yeah.
All right, David, you can put your hand back up if you still want to say something. I'm going to just lower it for now, and I'm going to move on to Vivian, and I'll allow Vivian to talk.
There are also a bunch of questions in Rocket Chat I haven't got to yet, and I feel bad because I told everyone to go there first. So yeah.
It's mostly just the discussion. I was monitoring it. It's mostly just people replying to each other. I've been paying attention. All right, so Vivian, you next if you want.
Okay, thanks. Hi, Wyatt. You said earlier, I think that you believe that AI can lead to the extinction of all humanity, but climate change is unlikely to do so. Now, Stephen Hawking said publicly that he thought climate change could end up making the Earth like Venus, which obviously would kill all humanity. So I was wondering why you don't agree with Stephen Hawking.
I think it's fair to say that climate change remains a massive issue and could cause devastation. I just because life has been through cycles of extinction before and has overcome it, my sense is that at least some life forms will survive extreme climate change. Maybe not humans. I mean, I don't disagree with you. I mean, it is possible that and the reason why I got involved in climate in the Green Party in the first place was because I fully accept the massive risk of climate change. the difference between AI and climate is simply that the AI could take it to the next level, and like whereas Green Party the climate change could cause collapse, AI could cause like full extinction, at least in theory. I mean, there again, whether it actually happens is one of a million possibilities. But the potential for AI to actually cause total extinction is, at least in theory, possible.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, Vivian. David, I don't know if that's a new hand, so I can go back to you if you want to try again.
Hello, can you hear me now?
Yes, yeah, perfectly.
Okay, great. Okay, I'd like to ask a question that I put into the chat, and that is, isn't it likely that the United States military industrial establishment is already working very deeply on this, and that they would have no compunction about monopolizing it entirely?
It is quite possible, yes. No, and I think this is one of the big. There's the technical risks of it being improperly built, but then there's the geopolitical and the governance risks of who builds it and how is it and what it's used for. And these are the kinds of questions that we need to address at a global level. And it'll be very, very difficult because there's always going to be this very strong power dynamic, power incentive to be the first to build it. The source of hope I would have on that front is that it takes a lot of very smart people to build AI systems, and for them right now, the private sector, so sectors like Google DeepMind or OpenAI, have a major advantage in terms of just the sheer number of talent, and so the progress is more likely to happen first in those private labs.
But aren't they? Excuse me, I'm sorry to interrupt, but aren't they contracting and working with the military industrial establishment anyway? I mean, these people are not separate necessarily, even though they're being paid by Google. Google is being paid by the American government.
Absolutely. So for example, Project Maven, where Google provided AI technology services for the Department of National Defense, is an example of that. From the best of my understanding, OpenAI is separate from that. They don't have any contracts with the military. Google does, but at Google DeepMind, which is a separate entity of Alphabet, technically doesn't. I mean, there again, it's a little bit murky. But there again, I mean, but it also brings up a really interesting point, which is that if you're a government and you have within your jurisdiction a company building a technology that could be extremely useful to you for national defense, there's going to be very strong incentives to influence that, if not outright nationalize or take control of it. The challenge being that the governments are still going to be dependent on the technologists to develop it. So they can't, if they scare away technologists too much, they'll go to a different country or they'll stop working on it. So there's this delicate dynamic between the power that the technology could create, but also the who's building it. And fortunately for now, I mean the people that I've talked to who worked at OpenAI and at Google DeepMind are genuinely pretty altruistic people. They do have the benefit of at least they like to think they have the benefit of humanity in mind. So I think that there's a chance that it's built well. But yes, the power dynamics of military influence, government influence are going to be there, simply because even to take the devil's advocate and play if you're the American military and you have as your mission to protect the American people, you may make a rational decision as to we need this technology and we're going to take control of it and use it in the military.
But I think that's a faulty assumption. Yeah. That the military has as their main goal to protect the American people. I think it's to protect the military suppliers of military equipment, hardware and software.
Yes, well, keep in mind every one of those people are also human beings who are going to be impacted by AI. So there's a sense of like, if they build AGI unsafely or if they're misuse it, it'll be impacting them as well. But it is a whole. There's a whole. We need these kinds of discussions are what I'm trying to spark with this presentation, which is that there's a lot of political and like moral discussions to be had around who builds it, how is it used, how do we ensure that everybody in the world benefits from it, not just those at the power of a particular nation. Yes, thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. I actually have a question for you, Wyatt, that I was thinking about that I don't think we've addressed. We've seen through the COVID pandemic and access to vaccines has been unequal across the world. At first, that was because of money and restrictive patent licenses. But as it's gone on, the biggest issue is actually the technology that allows the vaccines to be super cooled in remote regions, right? We know that the mRNA vaccines require a negative 70 degrees Celsius to be transported. So what do you think the potential impact for, I guess, stratification of society for places that are more remote? Let's say they don't have consistent access to electricity or the technology it would take to support AI.
I mean, I do think, I mean, that stratification is definitely an issue, and it's happening now. I mean, there's that famous saying that the future is already here, it's just not evenly distributed. And if you go to, the Bay Area, San Francisco, I mean, there's levels of technology and understanding that are not available in most parts of the world. But I guess the thing with AI is that, if the first, groups of organizations or groups of people that build it, are, if there are agreements in place as to how it should be used, and that the benefits are shared, the beauty or the value of AGI is that it could be used to provide all the technology that areas in the world currently don't have. I mean, it could be the great equalizer if it's properly used. There again, because it could produce goods and services much cheaper than we can now. It could, where there's currently lack of services or a lack of technology, that could be provided very efficiently and very quickly. There again, assuming that the AI systems are being used properly, and for the right reasons. It could also, I mean, the flip side, if we don't have proper agreements in place, it could be very tempting for those who build AGI to then just use it for themselves and maintain that extreme inequality.
Of course, part of the question is more just about we're talking about basically the cloud and the access to that kind of stuff, but there is still physical requirements, right? I don't know how many server farms, and with all the cooling requirements those exist in Central Africa.
Well, true. I guess my point would be that AI could be used to develop all the technologies you need to have a very, like, for example, to easily, for example, cell phones are used heavily in large parts of Africa already. They sort of jumped the gun in terms of skipped over landlines. There's a sense of like you can provide levels of technology, like very advanced levels of technology, to areas that don't have any technology at all, through advances that AI could provide. So I can see you can use it to fix those technological gaps, basically, and to develop easy, cheap solutions that could be easily rolled out to the parts that are most lacking currently.
Certainly hope so. All right, we'll move to Christine next. I'm just going to allow you to unmute, Christine.
Thank you very much. And what a stimulating conversation. In your opinion, what could Greens in Canada and internationally do to lobby the UN to establish an equivalent AGI body as there is with the IPCC? Thank you.
Great question. No, I think, well, so I mean, given that the Green Party of Canada is a federal Canadian party, I mean, Canada as a country can and should be a leader on AGI, if only because obviously it's relatively abundant, wealthy and well educated, but also because it's not the United States and China. It's probably not going to be where AGI is built, so we're not a threat. However, we can be a champion to start the discussion on AI safety, to have get these conversations going. We can be a host to AGI conferences. There's a lot of really important things that Canada can do. Not to mention Canada has a large AI community already. So I think what the Greens can do, and what I hope to see Canada as a whole could do, is to get lobby the Canadian government to push for active Canadian foreign policy on AI. Have Canada go to the UN and advocate for these bodies, and to build a coalition of other countries who are also working on this. And so I think the the most practical thing we could do right now is to lead at the well, beyond obviously educating ourselves and starting the conversation, but is to lead on the global stage in terms of getting this conversation started and getting these bodies in place.
All right, thank you, Christine. I'm going to move to a question now in the Rocket chat from Dennis. His question is, should Greens take a position on autonomous vehicles, either for, against, or neutral in light of your presentation today?
Autonomous vehicles are an interesting case. I mean, it's taken longer to roll them out than people thought because of a lot of regulations and a lot of complexities to driving. The current data that I've seen is that for example, the Tesla autopilot is, I think it's like 4 times safer currently than the average human driver. So if our goal is purely to reduce the amount of deaths on the road, I would be in favor of autonomous vehicles and rolling it out. I think it's generally a positive thing. And I think if, for example, my elderly parents who are having a harder time driving, due to decline in vision and mental health, autonomous vehicles could be a huge savior for a lot of people. It will be a big disruption to the labor market, but there are also some interesting new challenges that come with autonomous vehicles, which is, we live in a world of cyber insecurity, and the more electronically and the more connected your car is, the more at risk it is of being hacked by, or being controlled by an external source. So I do think the cybersecurity aspects need to be very clearly thought through. But I think, AI, we need AI for so many reasons. The real challenge with both current AI and future AI is we need to get AI right. We need to make sure we have the right, oversight, the right, enforcement of rules, whether it be the way it's designed, whether it be the way it's used. If done well, I think autonomous vehicles are going to be a huge, benefit for humanity. But asterisk is if done well. And this is where politics comes in, and where where you need to have these conversations around, what are the rules we should have in place, for autonomous vehicles and other AI.
I think if anybody's driven on the highway recently, they can tell with all of the what's that called again? When the person's driving really close behind you, speeding up and then weaving and then braking. I mean, that uses a lot of energy, right?
Yes.
It's possible autonomous vehicles would actually be more efficient. Allison, I'm seeing a message from you about Michael's hand. Yeah, I see Michael's hand. I was about to go to him and ask him if he wants to speak, though I don't know if he got pulled away to something else.
I'm here, actually. No, thanks for calling me. Wyatt, I'm celebrating that you're bringing this topic into the Green Party realm. It's making me feel like I'm not alone anymore. And I can see in the Rocket chat that there are a lot of people who are really interested in this. So I have a question for you, and it's really based on, first of all, to share. Sometimes when I really dive into this topic and think about the speed and complexity and scale and the rate of change that's already upon us, and I look back to how am I using my time, and I kind of see this gap between where the Green Party of Canada is at and being able to have meaningful impact on this front. And my question to you is, if you care to offer this insight, what keeps you, why do you see the Green Party of Canada as a viable vehicle given this situation?
Well, I mean, it's a very, very good question. I mean, I mean, there's actually a lot of talk about politics in general. I mean, should politics even be involved in technology? And I think yes, absolutely. I mean, I think the in an ideal world for me, every political party has a clear understanding and policy on AI. And I think because I mentioned, going back to my slides earlier, I mean, because the Greens have typically been very forward-looking, because they're looking at the bigger picture in terms of the ecosystems that sustain us and being I think there is, as we enter this what could be called the next stage of life in terms of and I didn't talk about this in my presentation, but we're reaching a point where you can have electronic life alongside biological life. I think if the Greens are there is an opportunity for the Greens to really reinvent themselves and to take the lead on this issue and to turn people's heads in terms of, oh wait, they're interested in AI, and ask questions like, why are they doing that? I think this is where if the Greens were to really be that leader on AI in Canada, not only would you gain support from a whole bunch of new constituencies across the country, but I think you could really what the Greens do best or have done best is to talk about things that nobody else is talking about, and to really to get that conversation started, for example, on things like guaranteed livable income. There's a lot of where I think the Greens can continue with their tradition of being forward-looking and open-minded. This is where the Greens could play a very big role in getting that conversation started, in proposing policies and getting people thinking about what we can do about it, and then whether it be getting elected on it or being the party of ideas. Either way, you could have a huge impact. Just showing people what's possible, as the Greens have done with gay marriage and climate change and a bunch of other topics. So, hope that answers the question.
All right, we have a question from Fred in the Rocket chat. We need to show actual examples of AI improving the human condition if we are to trust its use. For example, why didn't Google flu predict the pandemic? That would have been a socially beneficial use of AI with real world human impacts. So perhaps less of a question and more of a statement, but your response, Wyatt?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I mean, there have for example, translation is probably the best positive example of AI. I mean, there's a lot of, you can have now like live transcription in a foreign language. I mean, if you've tried to travel recently, pull out your Google Translate app and you can just talk to anybody in pretty much any other language. AI and translation industry has really brought people together and made it more accessible. So there are a lot of examples like that can be done. Meanwhile, there are plenty of examples where AI, like military drones, which are terrifying and making us lose faith in AI. So there again, I think the value of politics on AI is to make sure that we're constraining the bad uses of AI and making sure that the good uses are being promoted. A quick question for, I'm not sure for, I guess, Alison or Phoebe. I believe we have until 11:30 Eastern time.
11:30, yeah.
Okay, good, okay. So I guess we can take a few more questions and then I have one more slide afterwards to wrap it all up. Yeah, then I'm.
All right, yeah, I think we have space for a couple more questions. I'm actually gonna come up with one that someone raised at the last time we held, the first time we held this presentation, Wyatt. Someone asked about the impact on the slow living movement of everything being AI and sped up and technological based. And what about people who don't want to be plugged in all the time, or want to slow down and connect with people face to face?
This is a very, very.
Oh, Wyatt, I don't know. You're muted for me for some reason.
There are a lot of, a positive human future could be a very slow, quiet one if we want to go that way. And I think this is where they're going to go back to the value of talking about AI in a political context is to make sure that we're not racing ahead without any forethought, that we're not, adopting everything because it could be adopted. There again, we could, for example, on the human labor piece, we could decide that, we're happy, paying more and having slower service if a human does it for us than an AI system does it, because the value of that, the value you get out of the human relationship, is worth more than the value you can save in terms of cost and energy. So there's a lot of really important conversations around exactly what we have this technology. What should we use it for? What is the good use of AI? So yeah, it's very yeah.
All right, we'll go next to Bruno again. Follow-up question.
Yes, thank you, Wyatt. Actually, I have a follow-up to the previous question about why didn't we see a Google flu. And just in case you're not aware, at the beginning of the COVID-19 scenario, Kaggle, which is a company that works in open kind of research model, they actually started the largest open database for collecting the COVID-19 data. So to answer why wasn't it around this time? Well, we hadn't built those systems, but it will be around next time because of the project that Kaggle started openly globally with Google as well. So, and as a question to an even previous question, why can't we as the Greens, the party that stands for values and principles, the party that stands for correctness, in my opinion, not so much just the environment, why can't we create a think tank that deals strictly with the standardization, at least at a kind of political level, of what AI regulation should look like?
Well, I think we absolutely can. And there again, I think it'll churn heads and get the conversation started precisely because people aren't expecting it. I think, if any party did it, that'd be the case. But I think especially the Greens, because still very many people in Canada assume, oh, Green, they're only care about the environment. But I think this would be a real opportunity for the Greens to say, hey, no, actually, we're a leader on AI as well. And I think that would be very beneficial for Canada and for the world as a whole if you had that, those conversations started from, because the reality is AI is going to be a huge, even if all you care about is the environment, AI is going to be a huge factor in, resolving, a lot of the environmental issues, but also making sure that it doesn't cause environmental issues as well. So, yeah. So there again, I think when I was with the Greens, that I joined not just because of the environmental issues, but because it was a very forward-thinking party, and I think it's really this AI is another is an opportunity for the Greens to really take the lead and turn heads and make a real positive impact in a wholly new area.
All right, thank you. Okay, we have a question in the chat from John saying, any thoughts about consequences on human mental health?
Yes, well, I mean, it's absolutely. I mean, the current, we're racing ahead on technology, and we don't. A lot of the consequences of technology are only, known later. Social media being the poster child for this, where starts off this amazing tool to connect everybody, and then we're all now depressed, and we're all saying there's a lot of we're going to have to be careful with this. The interesting thing about AI, especially AGI, is that it could be used to help us solve our mental health issues. So even though it could cause us mental health issues along the way until we get to full AGI, once you reach that point where you have advanced tools like a fully human level, a lot of the issues we face with technology could be solved by technology, which is kind of counterintuitive and definitely risky, but it's at least possible. And there have been cases of technology solving us from previous technology in the past. For example, the whole green shift in the economy, the solar power, wind power, are saving us from the previous technologies of coal and gas. There's a sense of technology is this treadmill of constant change, and you can always you can use it to fix previous change issues. You do create new ones as you go along, but so far, and I think it's realistic to say that the technology has been used to solve issues in the past, other technology risks in the past, and it can continue to. And I think the race right now is to make sure that we are aware enough of the issues that are being caused by current technology so that we can solve with future ones. But there's a whole discussion around the pace of technology and how do you monitor impacts and how do you limit them, which is another chapter of this whole AI thing to discuss. So, yeah.
Sorry. All right. For those who are not monitoring the Rocket Chat in super detail, Michael just posted an interesting link to a German green political foundation who apparently are doing a lot of good work on political policies and such. Now I'm going to move to Sarah Gabriel, sorry if I'm saying your name wrong. There you go.
Hi. Yeah, I need to apologize. I thought the VGM started at 11, but I'm just a keener. That starts at starts at 11:30. And I just want to build off that conversation that's happening in the Rocket Chat and here with Wyatt. And my environmentalism is based in the concept that kind of from E.F. Schumacher, from his book Small is Beautiful. I don't know if you've read that yet. And it's kind of like the Green Movement's manifesto in some ways. And the idea is that in order to understand our ecosystems and to love our ecosystems enough to want to know how to save and want to save our ecosystems, we have to be in our ecosystem. So we have to be out in nature, whether that's growing food or just walking around in nature, just spending that time with nature. And so the shift that we see with our youth being online a lot is frightening, because I feel like there's that disconnect. Like, science tells us that we need to save the planet and change our ways, and these intelligences can maybe help us how to do that, but how that's where I'm curious about Wyatt's thoughts around policy. How do we go about navigating those two realities? Really, they are two realities: the online reality and the reality of being in a forest or being in our ecosystems.
It is a very, very good question, and I think, I mean, yeah, it is going to be very, very important to remain grounded in the real world, especially as a lot of these technologies can be almost seem like science fiction. And how do you square that? How do you square the current reality with the one we're headed into? I think, I mean, if I were to make a stab at it, yeah, I think the best you can do is continue to have those conversations, continue to be aware of everything. For example, we talked about the cloud. It seems like this ephemeral thing that up in the air. It's actually run on computers, servers, often burning coal or other so there's the whole internet online world seems like a very ephemeral one, but it's actually a very real physical one, and there are real physical consequences to that. Actually, there's Ron Diebert, there's a really good I believe it was actually, I think it's CBC Massey lecture this year 2021. He talked about the physical reality of the internet and of electronics. And how the two aren't disconnected. They actually are. I mean, to make AI work, to make this Zoom call work, is running on a bunch of power plants that are putting often CO2 into the air that we're breathing. So there's a sense of it's keeping those two realities in our minds together is going to be, I think, part of success. If it is, I mean, if we get too disconnected from the quote unquote real world or the physical world that we're used to, we will lose track of a lot of very important values and very important realities. But it's hard to do because it is. I mean, it feels so different. It's different skill sets, it's different knowledge bases, but they are connected. And we succeed together, or we succeed or fail apart, I think. Yeah.
All right, thank you. I think we have time for one last question. So Bruno, I see your hands up. I'll give it back to you.
Yeah, sorry, I just feel compelled to follow up on some of these answers. And to further answer that, I would say that technology is enabling us to, in a way, be more in touch with nature. So I'll give you my own personal experience on this. About 20 years ago, if we wanted to go and do any sort of interior backpacking, for example, in Canada, to really connect with nature, it would have been very hard because technology didn't afford us safety in that environment if something went wrong. Nowadays, I feel very safe taking my children deep into the woods in Canada because I know I'm connected to technology should anything arise. So that's just an extreme example, but even in agriculture, we're finding it, that more people are being empowered through technology to learn how to do things so that they can go outside and do those things more readily. So that's just my 2 cents on how technology could be a side-by-side, scenario. And not only that, I think that we have separate learning curves happening, or separate technology innovation curves happening, and they will eventually all intersect at an ideal stage, but we're not there yet. Some are further ahead than others, and that's why I think we're seeing this. Like with the online learning scenario, for example, had that been rolled out maybe 20 years ago and everyone was now on tablets already, well, a lot of it could have been done outside of the home environment even. So, but we're still kind of learning how to properly roll out online learning, for example. So those are my 2 cents on it. Thank you.
Yeah.
Wyatt, I'm gonna answer that because I think it's really interesting, Bruno, and it's such an interesting topic. Like I do a lot of backpacking, and there's tons of, I don't know, the Parks Ontario website's not fantastic. So you end up going into a lot of forums. This isn't AI specific, but technology really has made getting outside a lot more accessible for people. And we know that access to outdoor recreation can be really limited on racial and socioeconomic lines as well. So I follow a few Instagram accounts that are really dedicated to making the outdoors more accessible to people of color and really connecting them in ways that pre-internet might have been very, very difficult for people.
Yeah.
All right, Wyatt, we'll turn it back to you for your last slide there that you wanted to present.
Sure.
And I think you probably have about 5 minutes for that until we need to wrap up.
Perfect. Yeah, that's all I need here. So yeah, so to recap on what I was talking about, AGI, I hope I've made the case that it is the single biggest issue we face. There again, single biggest opportunity, single biggest risk. My position currently is that we need AI. We need to get it right. And that given the uncertain timing and the very large the impacts, success is going to be being ready. Do we have the institutions, the government's norms in place to make sure that the right people are building it, is being used for the right ways, the benefits are being shared, and that's we're and the other things too. I mean, lest it seem like I'm trying to while it may be a bigger issue than climate change, we still need to get climate right, because if you build AI in a world that is severely disrupted by climate, where there's a lot of stress, there's a lot of hardship, you're less likely to build AI well. There'll be more pressures to cut corners. There'll be less so in an ideal world, you have a very equal, very well balanced world with few pandemics or wars and that kind of stuff. So you have this context to build this very powerful technology. You do not want to be building AI in the middle of a war or during severe climate change. So a lot of the things that we're already working on need to be dealt with even more importantly than they were before. And there's a lot of there's so much to be talked about. Fortunately, it's also a very interesting topic, and I hope this has been interesting today. But it is like it really comes down to like, okay, so what's what is life about? What do we value? What kind of future do we want to live in? What is the role of Homo sapiens moving forward? I think there's a lot of just really important, really interesting conversations to be had, and given the unknown timeline and that it is a big topic, to start as soon as possible and to get moving on this as soon as we can. That is my recap and final thoughts. Thank you, everyone. I guess I can share the slides in the Rocket Chat as well, so people want to see them. I believe everything is being recorded too, so you can also watch this presentation again afterwards, if I'm not mistaken.
Right. A few people, Wyatt, asked about how they can get involved or how you recommend this be brought to the attention of the Green Party, perhaps a think tank or working group.
Yeah, I think it would be, I guess, a new policy initiative would probably be the best way to do it. Getting a working group around, getting those policy discussions started. There again, it's very, very early stage, so there's no like clear step-by-step thing you should do, other than to find people who are interested in working on it, get the working group together, start discussing policies, even if it's not meant to we're probably too early yet to have very anything concrete, other than to call for more education awareness and for call for an IPCC type body at the UN. At this point, the most important is just to find people who are interested in working on it and get the conversation started.
All right. Thank you so much for your presentation, Wyatt, and for everybody else who's attended. Thank you guys very much as well for coming. I don't know what the weather's like in your disparate parts of Canada, but I hope it's sunny and you get some outside time today after having spent all this time talking about technology and looking at a screen. I just want to plug the other two GreenTalks that are coming up. I actually had the pleasure of helping Ella, who was in attendance. I think she stepped out in her first animal food systems presentation. She is also a member of the Ottawa Centre green community. So I actually did her kind of tech help when she presented this last year around this time. So I think that's a really interesting discussion, even if you're not vegan or looking to become vegan. And then the other one, I didn't even know this was a topic, sex workers and COVID. Personally, I find that incredibly fascinating. And maybe something those in attendance didn't know, the Green Party is now the only federal party with decriminalization of sex work still in their platform. The NDP actually removed it from their platform prior to the 2019 election. And, you know, not to dig at the other parties too much, but as a workers' rights party, that is a very curious decision to me, perhaps their desire to mainstream themselves. So I'm maybe I'll tune into that sex workers and COVID one, because that sounds super interesting as well. And now we can hand it back to Allison. You can give the kind of wrap up and what's next.
Thank you so much for that amazing talk. Clearly, from all of the questions and all of the chat in Rocket Chat over here, that this is a topic that's really important to Greens. Thank you so much, Phoebe. Yesterday at Toastmasters, the word of the day was consummate, and I can definitely say you are the consummate facilitator. That was incredible. I just kind of sat back and listened with my arms crossed. I didn't have to do anything. And Wyatt, what a fantastic presentation. You offered so much information, gave us so much food for thought. I just want to remind everyone, the beauty of Rocket Chat is even after you leave Zoom, the conversation can still continue. So please feel free to keep discussing this topic in Rocket Chat. I'm sure Wyatt and Phoebe wouldn't mind keeping an eye on that and coming back every so often to answer any questions. If you have any resources, please feel free to put that in, and let's keep this conversation going, because I can see that this is really important. And as Wyatt said, I can definitely see that this becoming policy proposals in the near future. So right now, we're going to turn you over to the morning opening at the policy track, and we will begin at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, as Phoebe had mentioned. Thank you for that, with Ella Hayter. She's going to be talking about animal food systems. So thank you very much, and see you soon.
All right, thanks everybody.